Hello everyone. Today we will be talking about the ratification of the Constitution. Where we left off last class, they created the Constitution, but it was not a law yet. And what ratification means, it means to sign a document into law. So like I said, at the Constitutional Convention, which lasted for about 3 years, they continually worked on creating the Constitution, but once they created it, everybody had to sign it. So we're going to talk about how people finally signed it into law. Now that the Constitution was complete, it had to be signed by all the representatives from the colonies. There was a lot of debate over the ratification of the Constitution. So remember, there are 13 colonies at this time, essentially 13 states, and in order for the Constitution to become official, all 13 had to sign it. So there was two groups of people. There was the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Federalists supported the signing of the Constitution because they wanted a strong central government. George Washington led the Federalists, and they opposed the Bill of Rights. So we'll get into the Bill of Rights later, but George Washington led them, and they wanted a strong central government. So central government, remember, is where when they make laws, they're laws for the whole country. Anti-Federalists opposed the signing of the Constitution because they feared an overly powerful central government. So remember, a lot of these people were fearful of England. England had a strong central government. Remember, whatever the king said or did, everybody in the whole country had to do it. Anti-Federalists, they wanted the states and the people to have more power. And the leader of this group were Patrick Henry, George Mason, and Thomas Jefferson. They supported the Bill of Rights, which were 10 laws. They demanded they be included in the Constitution, ensuring the freedom of states and Americans. So Anti-Federalists wanted the Bill of Rights, which gave freedom to states and Americans. The Federalists, they opposed the Bill of Rights. They did not want it. And here's a little bit about the Constitution's Bill of Rights. They were written by James Madison, and James Madison is the father of the Constitution we learned about earlier. And Madison consulted the Virginia Declaration of Rights and the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, which is written by Thomas Jefferson, when drafting the amendments that eventually became the United States Bill of Rights. So when it says consulted, that just means where he got some of his ideas from. So James Madison, he really liked the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which is a document written by George Mason, and he liked the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedoms, which is a document by Thomas Jefferson. So he created the Bill of Rights, and the Bill of Rights are essentially just laws, 10 laws. The Bill of Rights are 10 amendments, and amendments means laws, included in the Constitution that guarantee the rights of individuals. Some of these freedoms are trial by jury, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, etc. So these are just basic laws that every American, no matter what, you have freedom of religion, you have freedom of speech, you have a trial by jury. And one of the important amendments that's not talked about as much is the 10th Amendment. And the 10th Amendment states that powers not given to the federal government belong to the states. This was created to limit the power of the federal government. So remember, the only power the federal government has is what's in the Constitution. So if it's not in the Constitution and it's not a federal power, then it belongs to the states. So states are free to make whatever laws they want as long as the federal government doesn't have that power. Next, we're going to talk about different political parties. And first, a political party, that simple definition is an organized group of people with similar political goals. This past election, I don't know how many you followed, but Hillary Clinton was a Democrat. The political party Hillary Clinton was with is the Democratic Party. And Donald Trump, the political party he is with, is the Republicans. So there's still political parties today, and political party is just organized group of people with similar goals. We're going to talk about two political parties, really the very first two political parties in the country. First one was the Federalist political party. They were led by John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. They believed in a strong central government, and they wanted the United States to have its own bank, something called Bank of the United States. We don't have a Bank of the United States. You've heard of Bank of America, but that's not what we're referring to. Bank of the United States is they didn't want private banks. They wanted the government to have its own bank. The next party is the Democratic Republicans. They were led by Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and they opposed the Federalists. So remember, Federalists want a strong central government. Democratic Republicans, they did not want a strong central government. And see how it's called Democratic Republicans? Today we have Democrats and we have Republicans. They're separate, but a long time ago, Democrats and Republicans, it was essentially one party. And here's some facts about them is Federalists were led by John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. They wanted a strong national government, and they believed in commercial economy, and they were supported by bankers and businessmen in the Northeast. Democratic Republicans were led by Thomas Jefferson. They wanted a weak national government and strong state government, agriculture economy, and supported by farmers, artisans, frontier settlers in the South. And artisans are people who make things. And the formation of political parties, really you have to know, is the presidential election of 1800, won by Thomas Jefferson, was the first American presidential election in which power was peacefully transferred from one political party to another. So remember, George Washington was our first president, and there was a guy named John Adams was our second president, but George Washington and John Adams were the same political party. And then when Thomas Jefferson won, he was the Democratic Republican, so that's when a new party came into power. And there was no wars, nobody fought. It was a peaceful transfer from one political party to another. Next, we'll be talking about some of the court cases. And first, you have to remember the United States, we have separation of powers. We have 3 separate branches. And we're going to talk about the judicial branch right here just for a sec. And the third branch of the U.S. government, the judicial branch, is responsible for hearing court cases. The Supreme Court is the highest court in the United States, and they decide important cases about law and disagreements between states and federal government. So if 2 states disagree, or let's say if the president makes a law that people think is not legal, they think it's illegal, it goes to the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, and they decide. This has happened recently. Donald Trump created a law where he wanted to ban people from certain countries, mainly countries in Africa and the Middle East. And the Supreme Court, when they saw this, they said, no, that's against the law, and they said that the president wasn't able to have that law. So it's very important, and we're just going to talk about some of the cases. So we're going to talk about the federal error, and you will learn about 3 Supreme Court cases in this class. These Supreme Court cases led by Justice John Marshall. So a justice is kind of like the judge, he's the head person. And John Marshall was from Virginia. If you ever heard of Marshall High School, it's named after him. And he laid the foundation blocks of the Supreme Court's authority to mediate disagreements between branches of government, levels of government, and competing business interests. And here are the 3 cases you will learn about. So the first one is Marbury versus Madison. And in Marbury versus Madison, this created the doctrine of judicial review. And that's where the Supreme Court decides if something is legal or illegal. So if any law is made, anybody can sue the government, and the Supreme Court will hear the case at some point, and they'll determine if that is legal or illegal. A recent example that I can think of is California made a law that said a man and a man or a woman and a woman, so gay marriage, was illegal. Somebody sued California, and it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, a man and a woman should be married. So it made it so it was legal in the whole country. So now everywhere in the United States, gay marriage is legal. A man can marry a man, a woman can marry a woman. And that all started from Marbury versus Madison. Another important case is McCulloch versus Maryland, and it set forth the doctrine of implied powers. And these are powers that are not written down but are expected. There's technically no law that says, or at least there was no law that said police are allowed to arrest people, but it's implied. People know that. So there are some powers that are not written down but are expected. And the last case is Gibbons versus Ogden, and this allows the government to regulate interstate, which is trade from state to state, commerce, and provide the government a broad national view of economic affairs. So if Virginia wanted to trade with Texas, that would be interstate trade because it's trade among states. And the government's allowed to regulate that. So if the government doesn't want Virginia sending tobacco to Maryland, they're allowed to say, no, you can't send that here, or you can only send so much. So it gave the government power to regulate trade, which is commerce. Commerce is trade. Okay, and that's it. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Make sure you finish your assignments. There is a lot of work to do today, and we do have a test coming up shortly.